Hello and welcome to History Cupboard, a YouTube show in which we delve into the dustier corners of the past and unearth strange and fascinating bits of information as well as interesting people. I'm Angus Donald, I'm a historical novelist, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the power of the sword. This sword is my sword, is one of 7 that were used in the making of the movie Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner. I cannot guarantee that he wielded this sword in the movie, but there were 7 of these used by various people, stuntmen, etc. But I still think it's rather nice. It was given to me by one of the readers of my Outlaw Chronicles novels, who very kindly bought it for me. Anyway, so the sword is much more than a weapon. It's a symbol of symbol of freedom, authority, and justice, and spiritual power as well. The weapon confers status as and marks the wielder out as a free man, a nobleman, or even a king. It's the emblem of a just war. That is a war that's a good war to fight. For example, like the Crusades were considered to be in the day. It's the righteous use of force. That's the sword. They would have been expensive. Charlemagne, who appears in my Fireborn Viking books, he set the price of swords in his empire, the Frankish Empire, at 7 gold soldi, which were little gold coins, and that's about 1,000 quid today. So they were very highly prized, they were very expensive, and they were handed down as family heirlooms from father to son. A Viking warrior, for example, probably wouldn't have one initially. He would go out and do his raiding and pillaging and stuff with a spear, a seax, perhaps a wood axe. And if he survived the first clash, he would try and steal a sword. And in fact, the most prized swords in the early Viking era were taken from the Franks, which were the best steel and the best swords. So they were expensive, they were valuable, and rare as well. A sword could have its own name. Charlemagne's blade, for example, was called Joyeuse. The Frankish hero Roland, who died tragically at Roncesvalles, had a sword called Durendal. King Arthur, of course, had Excalibur. And I've written an Arthurian novel, the first of 3, or possibly more, and I've got Excalibur in there, which is made from a meteor. More about that later on. And this sword, its special power is it's made of steel rather than the softer iron, and so it's a superior blade for that reason in my King Arthur novels. A sword is kind of a person. It has a name, it has an identity. When you could it had character, if you like. King Magnus Barefoot of Norway possessed a sword called Legbiter. Ferdinand III of Castile had a sword called Wolfslayer, and Excalibur could not be blunted ever in the traditional Arthurian tales, and the scabbard could heal wounds. So it was sort of a person. When Roland dies in the famous poem, I've forgotten the name of the poem, but when Roland dies in the Song of Roland, it's called, silly of me, Song of Roland, when he dies, he says goodbye to his sword as if his sword was a person, a friend or a lover or something. So there's a tender scene when he says goodbye to his sword. Swords are also filled with magic. As well as having personality, they're full of magic and other supernatural powers. Crusaders would use their swords as makeshift crucifixes when they were praying on crusade, for example, or before battle, to invoke the holy cruciform shape of the cross and connect more easily with God. But the power of the sword reaches well before the Crusades. Because it's made of iron and it's got a special magical status. Blacksmiths, armourers and blacksmiths who made them, had a kind of almost shamanic power. They were often banished to the edges of villages or settlements to do. It was very noisy, their work, and very smoky and smelly, but like tanning. But they were banished to the edges of settlements, and they also had the power to sort of combat evil and do their magical making of swords. In Kenya today, blacksmiths are still considered to be rather special, and again put at the periphery of villages and stuff. So the blacksmith is a magical, almost shamanic figure. There's a story about an ancient European folk story called The Smith and the Devil, in which a blacksmith outwits the devil and learns how to make swords. But it was probably because the first swords came from meteors, as I mentioned before, and this is sort of a holy material, iron ore in meteors, that came from the sky. So the sword retained some of that heavenly essence, that magical heavenly essence that comes from meteors. It was the mystical power of the sword that inspired me to write this book, The Loki Sword, which is part of the Fireborn series, and it's about a quest by a bunch of Vikings who go and find a famous sword called Tyrfinger, which is in some of the sagas, and it was owned by the king of the Goths in a famous battle with the Huns, and in my story the sword is cursed, so that anybody who wields it will win, but they will also die. So there's all sorts of mythology surrounding swords, both real and imaginary. You might think that the sword belongs to ancient times, to medieval times and dark ages and all that kind of thing, and it has no role today, but it looms very large in our culture still. We have so many expressions in English: to cross swords with someone meaning to argue, to fall on one's swords, to resign nobly. Something could be a double-edged sword, meaning it can cut, but it also could cut you. And that's a proposition that's rather dangerous. We've got the sword of Damocles. People live by the sword and they're expected to die by the sword. It's all over our language. It's very important in our language. The pen, you might think, is mightier than the sword. It's much easier to write with, I have to say. There's also one of the most successful movie franchises of the modern era is the Star Wars thing, and of course right at the centre of that is the Jedi Knight with his lightsaber, which of course is a sword, and almost every Star Wars movie seems to end with a sword duel, lightsaber duel between the good guys and the bad guys. So it's still very central to our culture, despite not being of any practical use today. Anyway, that's the power of the sword. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you again on the next History Cupboard.